It came out of nowhere. One phone call. My hands trembled as I held the receiver, listening to the words that would shatter everything I knew. Mom, Daniel said, his voice flat, distant. We've talked about this. It's time for you to find your own place. I blinked, certain I hadn't heard him correctly. What do you mean, Daniel? Where am I supposed to go? You're my son. I've been here for you your whole life. You're not a burden, Mom, but things have changed. We don't have room for you anymore. I felt my heart stop. I pressed the phone harder to my ear, as though doing so might make him say something else, something softer. What are you saying? Find your own place, he repeated. It's time. For a moment, everything around me went still. My breath caught in my throat and I couldn't speak. I thought it was a joke, some sort of twisted misunderstanding, but the silence after his words told me it wasn't. Daniel, you're serious? I barely managed to choke out. Yeah, I am, he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I could hear Emma in the background, though her voice was muffled, distant. Maybe she had told him to say it. Maybe it was her idea. But I've lived here for over 30 years, I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. I gave everything for you, Daniel. I raised you. I sacrificed so much. I know, Mom, but I can't keep living in the past. We've talked about it, and I think this is the best move for all of us. The words cut through me like a knife. He was telling me that the last 55 years of my life, everything I had done for him, didn't matter. It was gone, like it never even existed. Just give me time, Daniel. I'll figure something out. I don't know why I said that. There was no figuring it out. I knew that. But I had to say something to keep the conversation going, to delay the inevitable. Maybe if I said something, if I begged him, he'd change his mind. He didn't. You've got plenty of time, he said, but don't wait too long. We've already booked a place for Emma's family for the holidays, and I interrupted him, my voice breaking. You can't just do this to me. After everything. Yeah, I can. I think we've both known this day was coming for a while now, Mom. I'm not the little boy you raised anymore. The finality in his voice hit me like a brick wall. It was over. All these years, all the care, all the love, suddenly it meant nothing. I felt sick. Empty. Goodbye, Mom, Daniel said. And before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear, not knowing what to do or where to turn. The walls of my house, the house that had been my home for decades, felt like a cage. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a monument to the life I had built, and now it was crumbling around me. I could feel the weight of my entire existence coming down on my shoulders, crushing me, suffocating me. I stood up, pacing around the living room, trying to hold back the tears, but they came anyway. I'd spent my life taking care of him, and now he was telling me to leave. Just like that. No warning, no explanation. Just a cold, heartless demand. And Emma, I could hear her voice in the background, the way she had subtly pushed him into this decision. She had always made it clear how much she disliked me, how she thought I was a burden. She had won. They both had. I couldn't breathe. I stumbled over to the window, staring out at the street. Everything felt surreal, like I was living in someone else's nightmare. I wanted to scream, to rage at the injustice of it all, but there was no one left to listen. I looked around the house, at the things that had once brought me joy. The family pictures on the walls, the furniture I'd carefully chosen, the garden Daniel and I had planted together, and now it was all meaningless. I had given everything to him. I had always been there for him, and now he was telling me to go. I didn't know what to do, but one thing was certain: I was alone. And nothing in this world could ever change that. It's been days, and I still can't believe what happened. Every time I wake up, it feels like some cruel joke. But it isn't. It's real. My son, my own flesh and blood, had thrown me out like I was nothing. I could barely bring myself to go through the motions of the day, as if the weight of his words still hung in the air. I tried to walk around the house, but it was like stepping through a stranger's home. The walls that used to echo with laughter now felt cold and silent. The kitchen, where we'd shared countless meals, felt like a tomb. Even the smell of coffee, The one thing I used to love every morning felt foreign to me now. It was all too much. I paced through the rooms, not knowing where to go. My life had been built here. All those years spent working, caring, supporting, it felt like it was gone in a blink. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter. I'd rebuild. But how? Where? I stood in the living room, staring at the empty space where his shoes used to be by the door. The coat rack with his jacket still hanging there seemed to mock me. I wanted to pull it down and scream. I wanted to throw everything out the window. But I stayed still, frozen. Like all the movement inside me had disappeared. The phone rang, and for a moment, my heart leaped, hoping it was Daniel calling. Maybe he'd realized how wrong he was. Maybe he'd come to apologize. But it wasn't him. It was Emma's name flashing on the screen. I stared at it for a few seconds, not knowing whether to answer or not. But I did, my hand shaking as I lifted the receiver to my ear. Hello. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it cracked at the end. Hi, Mom. Emma's voice came through, far too cheerful for my liking. Just wanted to make sure you're okay. I swallowed. I'm fine, I said, though I wasn't. How could I be? I thought I'd check. You know, Daniel's been under a lot of stress with work and everything. I'm sure this whole thing is tough for him, too, she continued, sounding almost too calm. Tough for him? I echoed. My chest tightened with each word. He told me to leave. After everything, he told me to go. There was a long pause on the other end. I almost thought she was going to apologize. But instead, she said, well, you know Daniel. He doesn't always know how to deal with things. He's just trying to move forward with his life. It was like a slap across the face. Move forward? Move forward from what, Emma? I've been here for him since day one, and now he's just cast me aside. My voice shook, but I didn't care. How could you let him do that? Another pause. I could almost hear her eyes roll from here. It's not like that, Mom. He's just trying to build his own future. And, well, you should probably think about yours, too. That was it. No empathy. No regret. Just cold indifference. Goodbye, Emma, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Before she could respond, I hung up. I stared at the phone, anger bubbling inside me, but more than that, grief. My heart felt like it was breaking into pieces. My son, the boy I'd raised, didn't care. Emma didn't care. I was just an afterthought. A nuisance they had to get rid of. I couldn't stay in this house. I couldn't be surrounded by all these memories, knowing they meant nothing to him. I walked into my room, opened the closet, and began packing. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have a plan. But I had to leave. I had to go somewhere, anywhere. But here. The tears came then, unbidden. They fell as I folded clothes and shoved them into an old suitcase. But I didn't stop. If I did, I might have stayed. If I stayed, I might never leave. And I couldn't let that happen. The silence around me was deafening. The life I'd known felt like it had been ripped from under me. And now I had to find a way to survive without it. The days passed, but the weight of Daniel's rejection never lifted. It hung over me like a dark cloud, suffocating me. I spent most of my time pacing the house, doing everything I could to avoid thinking about what had happened. But it was impossible. Every corner of this place reminded me of my son. His toys scattered across the floor, his old jacket hanging in the closet, the pictures of him I'd proudly framed. All of it, every single thing, felt like a slap to my face. I stood in the kitchen one morning, staring blankly at the countertop. The smell of coffee in the air did nothing to calm the storm inside me. I had always thought I'd have more time, more years to be with my son, to watch him grow into the man I'd hoped he'd be. But now he had pushed me out. He was gone, and all I had left were these memories. I closed my eyes, breathing in deeply. It was in that moment that the idea hit me, Morocco. I had always wanted to visit. I'd dreamed of it for years, imagining the vibrant streets of Marrakesh, the scent of spices, the bustling markets, the endless skies stretching above me. But I'd put it off. There had always been a reason to stay behind. Family, work, responsibilities. But now, nothing was tying me down. I wasn't going to wait anymore. I set the coffee cup down and grabbed my phone. My hand shook. but I had to make the call. I searched for flights, my heart pounding with each click. When I found one that fit, I didn't hesitate. I booked it. The plane would leave in 3 days. I didn't know what awaited me there, but I knew one thing: I had to leave. I had to leave this house, this life, this pain. The house had been my world for so long, but it was also a prison now. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't cling to the past, to the pieces of a life that no longer existed. I wasn't sure if I was running away from my son or toward something better, but it didn't matter. This was my chance to rebuild, to heal. I stared at the phone in my hand, feeling a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was making the right decision. I wasn't just moving, I was reclaiming my life. The days leading up to the flight were a blur. I spent my time packing, arranging the sale of the house. I didn't tell Daniel or Emma. They had no right to know. They had made their decision to shut me out. Now, it was my turn to shut them out. I didn't care about their opinion anymore. I was no longer the mother waiting by the phone for her son to call. I wasn't the woman in the background, serving everyone's needs, hoping for some acknowledgement in return. I was someone new. I was doing this for me, for the first time in my life. It was almost too easy to let go. I sold the house without a second thought, knowing it was the right choice. The house had been filled with love. Yes, but now it felt like a place of mourning. I didn't need it anymore. Packing up my life into a couple of suitcases felt surreal. I thought about everything I was leaving behind, every inch of the house, every familiar object that held a memory. But I wasn't sad. Not anymore. The sadness had been replaced with something else. Freedom. As I loaded the last of my belongings into the car, I paused for a moment and glanced back at the house. It would be someone else's soon. A new family would fill the empty rooms, and I would find something new. I didn't know what lay ahead in Morocco, but I knew it didn't matter. I wasn't the woman who had been abandoned anymore. I was the woman who had made a choice to leave everything behind and start over, to find herself again. I turned the key in the car's ignition and pulled out of the driveway. I didn't look back. I stood in the living room, looking around at the walls that had seen so much of my life. The family dinners, the birthday parties, the quiet evenings after work. It all seemed so far away now. Yet, it wasn't enough to make me stay. It was just a house, after all. A place I had poured my heart into, but now it felt like a prison. The decision to sell had come easily enough. But now, as I stood there waiting for the realtor to arrive, the weight of it all settled on me. This house had been the center of my world for decades, a home where I raised Daniel, where we laughed and cried together. And now, I was closing that door forever. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I opened the door to find Carla, the realtor I'd hired to handle the sale. She smiled politely, her expression professional but with a hint of concern. "Hello, Mrs. Taylor. I'm ready to start," she said, glancing around the entryway. "I know this is a big step for you." I nodded, trying to muster a smile. "It's the right decision," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Let's get started." We moved through the house, room by room, as she took notes and assessed everything. She spoke about market value, potential buyers, and timelines, but I barely heard her. My mind kept drifting to memories. The way Daniel used to run through the hallways, the evenings when we'd sit around the dinner table, the holidays when we were all together. But none of that mattered anymore. The house was just a building now. The real memories, the real love, had already left. By the time we sat down to sign the paperwork, I was exhausted, emotionally drained. But there was a sense of finality that came with it, a sense of relief. The house was no longer my anchor. "I'll get the listing up right away," Carla said, as she slid the papers across the table for me to sign. I signed without hesitation, feeling the weight of my decision lift off my shoulders. It didn't take long for the house to sell. It was almost surreal how quickly it happened. A few showings, a couple of offers, and within a week, I had a buyer. The money from the sale was more than enough to start over, to make a fresh start in Morocco. When I got the call from Carla to let me know the deal was finalized, I felt a surge of emotion I couldn't quite place. It wasn't just the relief of knowing I could move forward. It was the closing of a chapter, the end of a life I had built for so long. A part of me mourned the loss, but another part of me felt lighter, free. I made the final arrangements to transfer the property, handing over the keys to the new owners. It was strange to think that someone else would live in this house, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. I had a plane ticket to buy, a future to create. The neighbors started to notice. They came over to say their goodbyes, offering condolences, their faces a mix of sympathy and surprise. They couldn't quite believe that I was leaving. Many of them had watched Daniel grow up in this house, just like I had, but none of them knew what had really happened between us. They only knew that I was selling and moving away, and they didn't know how to process it. "I can't believe you're leaving, Nancy," Mrs. Green, the woman next door, said one afternoon as she helped me pack up the last of my things. "You've lived here so long. Are you sure this is the right move?" I smiled faintly, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to rise. "It's the only move I can make," I said quietly. "You've always been such a strong woman," she added, patting my arm. "I know you'll do well wherever you go." I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I believed her. The past few weeks had stripped me of my confidence, but something in her words made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I could do this. I could move on. As the final days in the house passed, I packed up the last of my belongings. It was a bittersweet process, but with every item I put away, I felt myself getting stronger. I wasn't just walking away from a house. I was walking away from the past. I was leaving behind the hurt, the disappointment, and the rejection. I was moving towards something new, something that belonged only to me. When the last box was packed and the house was empty, I stood in the doorway one final time. The silence that filled the space felt different now. It wasn't the emptiness of loss. It was the emptiness of possibility. With the sale completed, the weight that had weighed so heavily on me for so long began to feel lighter. I had made the right choice. I was finally free to begin again. I sat in my seat, staring out the airplane window, the ground below slowly shrinking as we ascended into the sky. It felt surreal. This wasn't just a plane ride. This was the beginning of something entirely new. I could feel the excitement building in my chest, but there was also a flutter of doubt that lingered in the back of my mind. What was I doing? The flight attendants moved up and down the aisles, their voices calm and professional, but everything felt distant. My eyes kept drifting to the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow across the clouds. I wasn't sure what awaited me in Morocco, but the unknown felt thrilling. For years, my world had been small. It had been centered around my son, my home, the life I had built for us. And now that world was gone. I couldn't help but wonder if I was making a mistake. Was I really ready for this? The man sitting next to me in the aisle seat cleared his throat, pulling me from my thoughts. I glanced over at him. He looked about my age, with a weathered face and a tired, yet kind, expression. His dark eyes met mine, and he gave a small smile. "First time to Morocco?" he asked with a slight accent, his voice warm and friendly. I nodded, smiling back. "Yes, it is. I've always wanted to visit, but, well, life got in the way." "I understand," he said with a slight chuckle. "It has a way of doing that." He paused, looking out the window as the plane climbed higher. "I'm from Spain, actually. I've been to Morocco several times for business. You'll love it there." His words carried a sense of calm, and something about the way he spoke put me at ease. "I hope so," I said, glancing at the map on the screen in front of us, showing the route we were taking. "I'm hoping to find something I've lost. I'm not sure what exactly, but I'm hoping this trip helps me figure it out." He looked back at me, his expression softening. Sometimes the journey is more important than the destination. Morocco is a place of new beginnings. It has a way of making you see things differently. I considered his words for a moment, feeling a strange sense of reassurance. Maybe he was right. Maybe this trip wasn't about having all the answers. Maybe it was about simply starting over, giving myself the chance to heal and rediscover who I was without the weight of everything that had been holding me back. As the hours passed, the conversation drifted between light topics: his travels, my plans for Morocco, small talk that felt easy and unimportant. But it was a welcome distraction. It was as if talking to him helped push aside the uncertainty that had been gnawing at me. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to enjoy the moment, to feel the thrill of doing something just for me. Soon enough, the captain's voice crackled through the speakers, announcing that we were beginning our descent into Morocco. The plane started its slow descent, and I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. My heart fluttered, and I couldn't help but wonder if I was making the right choice. But there was no turning back now. As we landed and taxied toward the gate, the plane's wheels screeched on the runway, and I took a deep breath. The journey was just beginning. This was the start of a new chapter in my life, a chapter that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or expectations. When the plane came to a halt, I gathered my things and stood up. The man beside me smiled again as he gathered his belongings. "Good luck, Senora. I'm sure you'll find what you're looking for here." "Thank you," I said, feeling oddly comforted by his words. I made my way through the airport, following the signs to baggage claim. The airport was bustling with people from all over the world, tourists, locals, and business people, all moving in different directions. It felt like I had entered a new world, one that was vibrant and full of possibility. As I waited for my luggage, I caught sight of a woman in her mid-30s, talking to a man in a business suit. She glanced at me and smiled warmly, as if recognizing something in me. It was a small gesture, but it made me feel like I wasn't as alone as I had thought. The baggage carousel whirred to life, and I grabbed my suitcase, feeling its weight in my hands. For the first time in a long time, I felt something resembling hope. The journey had only just begun, and though I didn't know what the future held, I was ready to embrace it. I walked out of the airport, stepping into the warm Moroccan air, the smell of spices and fresh bread wafting toward me. The world felt different here. For the first time in ages, I felt alive, and that was enough. The plane touched down in Marrakesh, and as I stepped off, the warm Moroccan air wrapped around me like a blanket. It wasn't like anything I had imagined, yet it felt right, new and strange, yet oddly familiar. The streets of the city were alive with color and noise, the air thick with the scent of spices, fresh bread, and the distant hum of conversation. I had never been to a place like this, but somehow I felt at home. I made my way to the small apartment I had rented, a modest place tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. It was nothing like the house I'd left behind in America, but there was a certain charm to it. The walls were painted in soft pastels, and the windows opened to a view of a narrow street lined with vendors selling their goods. It was simple, but it was mine. The first few days were a blur of new sights and sounds. The city was a labyrinth of narrow alleys and bustling markets, where the air was thick with the chatter of shopkeepers and the calls of merchants hawking their wares. The heat was almost suffocating at times, but I didn't mind. It was a stark contrast to the cool silence of the house I had left behind. One morning, I wandered into a small market in search of breakfast. The market was overflowing with colors, bright red tomatoes, golden loaves of bread, baskets filled with dried fruit, and fragrant herbs I couldn't name. I was drawn to a small stall where an older man was selling fresh mint leaves. I had read about mint tea, a staple in Moroccan culture, and I was eager to try it. The man looked up as I approached, his weathered face creased with age and kindness. He smiled, revealing a set of crooked teeth, and gestured toward the mint. "You are new to Marrakesh?" he asked, his voice warm with curiosity. I nodded, feeling a little out of place. "Yes, I'm still getting to know the city." "You will learn quickly," he said, wrapping a handful of mint in brown paper. "Marrakesh has a way of teaching you what you need to know. It's a city of stories." I smiled, taking the mint from him. "I hope I'm ready for those stories." His eyes twinkled. "We all are, whether we know it or not." As I left the market, clutching the bundle of mint in my hands, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just the physical distance from my old life. It was the emotional distance as well. I had come here to escape, to find peace, but more than that, I had come here to rediscover who I was. The next few days were spent wandering through the city, soaking in everything it had to offer. I visited the Jardin Majorel, a beautiful garden filled with exotic plants and tranquil paths. I sat in the square at Jima Elfna, watching the street performers and listening to the rhythm of the drumbeats that filled the air. But it wasn't just the places that fascinated me, it was the people. I met a young woman named Nadia in a cafe one afternoon. She was a tourist like me, traveling solo, and we quickly struck up a conversation. She told me she was from Spain and had been traveling around Morocco for the past few weeks. We shared stories of our travels, laughing about the little misadventures we'd had along the way. "What made you come here?" she asked, her eyes curious. I hesitated for a moment, but then I decided to be honest. I needed a change. A fresh start, I guess. I've been through some difficult times. Nadia nodded, her expression understanding. Sometimes, traveling is the best way to heal. To find a new version of yourself. I smiled, grateful for her words. They felt like a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this journey. It had only been a week since I had arrived, but already I felt like I was beginning to find myself again. The nights in Marrakesh were just as magical as the days. I would sit on the small balcony of my apartment, watching the stars above and listening to the sounds of the city below. There was something incredibly peaceful about it all. The way the world seemed to slow down, as if giving me space to breathe. The pain of losing Daniel, of being cast aside by my own son, still lingered, but it no longer consumed me. It was there, like a shadow I couldn't quite shake off, but it no longer held power over me. I had started something new, something that was mine. I was no longer defined by my role as a mother, a caretaker, a woman who had spent her life in service to others. In Morocco, I was just me, Nancy. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. It came unexpectedly, like a ghost from the past. My phone rang one evening as I was settling in with a cup of mint tea on my small balcony. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky streaked with deep purple and orange. For a moment, I thought I imagined it, but then the ringtone repeated and I saw his name flash on the screen. Daniel. My heart stopped. The name felt so foreign now, so distant. I hadn't heard from him in weeks. No texts, no calls, no word of any kind. And now here he was, reaching out. I stared at the phone for a long moment, the weight of it heavy in my hand. My mind raced. What did he want? Why now? After everything, why was he calling? With a deep breath, I answered. Hello. My voice was steadier than I expected, but my heart was pounding. Nancy. Daniel's voice crackled through the line. It sounded unfamiliar, soft, hesitant. It's me. I swallowed, my throat tight. I know who it is, I said quietly. I don't know what to say. He paused, and I could hear him take a shaky breath. I was wrong, Mom. I shouldn't have done what I did. I've been thinking about it for so long. I don't know what came over me. His words hit me harder than I expected. The rawness in his voice, the vulnerability, was something I hadn't heard from him in years. It was the first time I felt like he was truly, deeply sorry. But it didn't make the pain go away. The betrayal, the hurt, the coldness, it was all still there, lingering in the background. Why now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Why after everything? I've been talking to Emma, he said, his voice faltering again. She's been worried about you, about everything. She said maybe I should reach out, that it might be too late, but I don't know. I just feel like I need to fix this. I want to come see you. I want to make it right. I took a slow breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. A part of me wanted to jump at the opportunity to embrace him again, to heal the rift between us. But another part of me, a stronger, more resolute part, knew that forgiveness wasn't so simple. Not anymore. You want to come visit me? I repeated, my mind racing. Why? So you can tell me you're sorry and then leave again? Is that it, Daniel? He was silent for a moment, the weight of my words sinking in. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost defeated. No, Mom. I'm not trying to make things go back to the way they were. I just want to show you that I'm sorry. I want to be a better son. I don't know what that means, but I'm trying. I felt the sting of tears behind my eyes, but I forced them down. I didn't want to cry over him anymore. Not now, not here. I don't know what you want me to say, Daniel, I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. You left me, and now you want me to open the door again. You can't just waltz back into my life and expect everything to be okay. It doesn't work that way. I'm not asking for everything to be okay, he said, his words softer now. I'm just asking for a chance to make things right. Please, Mom. I know I hurt you, and I can't take that back. But I want to try. His words hung in the air like a weight, a burden I wasn't sure I was ready to carry. The silence stretched on between us, thick with unspoken feelings and old wounds. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said finally, my voice small. I don't know if I can trust you again. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I understand, he whispered. I'll give you time. But I need you to know that I'm sorry, truly sorry. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of emotion threaten to overwhelm me. Part of me wanted to scream, to tell him that it was too late, that I had moved on without him, that I didn't need his apology. But another part of me, the part that still loved him, wanted to believe him. I don't know if I can ever forget what you did, I said, my voice wavering. But I'll think about it. I'll think about whether I want you in my life again. He didn't say anything else after that. We said our goodbyes in silence, and I hung up the phone, staring out at the Moroccan sky. The stars were beginning to twinkle above me, and the cool night air felt refreshing against my skin. But inside, I was torn. The call had shaken me more than I expected. I had come so far. I had found a new life for myself here, one that didn't depend on anyone else. But now I had to face the hardest question. Could I ever forgive him? Could I open my heart again, knowing how much it had been hurt? It had been weeks since Daniel's call, and I had made my decision. I would not chase after his affection. I would not bend over backward to make him feel better about the damage he had caused. He had made his choice, and now so had I. The distance between us wasn't just physical, it was emotional, too. I wasn't angry anymore. At least, not the way I used to be. The anger had faded, replaced by something else, clarity. I realized that I didn't need him to validate my life, to tell me I mattered. For the first time in a long time, I was standing on my own 2 feet. And I liked it. Each day in Marrakesh brought something new, something vibrant and full of life. The city was constantly changing, and with it, I was changing, too. I spent my mornings exploring new streets, my afternoons sipping coffee in little cafes, and my evenings wandering through the bustling souks. It was the freedom I hadn't realized I was craving. I had stopped waiting for Daniel to call. The silence between us became a comfort, not a weight. I focused on myself, on the life I was building, on the person I was becoming. The pain of losing him was still there, deep in my chest, but it no longer consumed me. It was background noise now, something I could ignore. But Daniel, it seemed, was struggling. I could feel his regret even from this distance. He reached out less and less, his calls fewer, his messages short and apologetic, like he was trying to find a way back into my life without fully acknowledging what he had done. He still didn't get it. He still didn't understand that I wasn't waiting for him to fix everything. I wasn't waiting for him to come back and make things right. One afternoon, I got a message from him. "How are you?" it read. Simple, casual, like nothing had ever happened. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling a pang of sadness, but I didn't respond immediately. The words I wanted to say about how much he'd hurt me, about how long I had waited for him to realize what he'd lost, stayed unsaid. Instead, I put the phone down and walked outside, into the warmth of the Moroccan sun. That evening, I sat in my apartment, watching the sunset over the city. The streets below were alive with sound, people laughing, music drifting from open windows, the calls of vendors. The world seemed to be moving on without me, and I felt strangely content. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting. I wasn't waiting for Daniel to come around, for Emma to apologize, for my life to go back to the way it had been. I was simply living. As I sipped my tea, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a longer message from Daniel. "I miss you. I hope you're doing well. I know I've messed up, but I still love you, Mom." The words hit me harder than I expected. A part of me wanted to respond, to tell him everything that had been building up inside me, but I didn't. Instead, I let out a long breath and put the phone down once more. I had said everything I needed to say the day I left. Now, it was up to him to figure out how to live with his choices. The days that followed were quiet. I didn't hear from him again. I didn't chase him. I didn't need to. For the first time in my life, I was truly free of the need for his approval, for his love. And in that freedom, I found peace. I had finally let go of the last thread that had tied me to my old life. I no longer needed Daniel's validation to feel like I was enough. I was enough just as I was. I continued to explore Marrakesh, making friends with shopkeepers, tourists, and locals. I laughed more, cried less, and began to see the world in a way I hadn't before. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I was okay with that. I was the one in control of my life now. Not Daniel, not Emma, just me. Daniel's regret, though palpable, was his to carry. I had my own life to live now, one that didn't revolve around his actions or his mistakes. He could be a part of it if he chose to be, but he no longer held the power to make or break me. I had taken that power back. As the days turned into weeks, I realized that the power had shifted. I was no longer waiting for something to change. I had changed, and that in itself was enough. It had been a few months since I'd arrived in Morocco, and with each passing day, I felt more at peace. The pain of losing Daniel was still there, but it was no longer consuming me. It had faded into something distant, something that no longer defined me. I had carved out a new life for myself, one that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. But as I settled into my new rhythm, I began to notice something strange. I had been distant from Daniel for months, but I couldn't ignore the growing ripple effects of his decisions back home. Word from old friends and acquaintances trickled to me through social media, and what I was hearing wasn't pretty. His marriage to Emma, the one he had always flaunted, was beginning to show cracks. People whispered about the tension, about the arguments that had been growing louder and more frequent. I didn't need to hear the details to know that things were falling apart. I had always known Emma's coldness, her manipulative nature, and now it seemed it was catching up with them. One evening, as I sat in a cafe near the heart of Marrakesh, sipping my tea and watching the sunset over the bustling streets, a message came through on my phone. It was from an old friend of mine, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. "I'm sorry to hear about Daniel and Emma," the message read. "I heard things are falling apart. I just thought you should know." The words hit me harder than I expected. I had known that Daniel's actions had consequences, but seeing the effects of it all, hearing that their perfect life was unraveling, made something twist in my chest. I wasn't happy about their struggles, not exactly, but there was a bittersweet satisfaction in knowing that the consequences of his choices were no longer something I had to carry. I had spent so long under their control, trying to mend the unfixable, waiting for him to see the damage he'd caused. But now I was free, and for the first time, I wasn't the one suffering. It was him. Days went by, and the whispers grew louder. Daniel had reached out again, trying to reconnect, but I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He was no longer the center of my universe, but his messages were desperate. "Mom, I know things are hard with Emma," he wrote one day, "but I want to talk to you. I've been thinking about everything. I've been thinking about you. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a moment, the old pain rising like a shadow, but I pushed it back down. I didn't owe him my time anymore. I had already spent too many years waiting for him to understand what he had done. Now I was the one with the power, the one who had risen above it all. His life, meanwhile, was falling apart. I heard through the grapevine that Emma had started spending more time away from home, and Daniel, who had once strutted around with the pride of someone who had it all, now seemed smaller, diminished. He was no longer the confident, cocky son I had once known. He was a man weighed down by the consequences of his own choices. I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for him. Not because I believed he deserved it, but because I knew what it felt like to be torn apart by someone you loved. His regret was real, but it came too late. I had learned the hard way that love couldn't fix everything. And now, Daniel was learning the same lesson, but it was a lesson that came with scars, ones I could never undo for him. I thought back to the last time we spoke, when he had asked for forgiveness. It felt like a lifetime ago, and yet it was only a few months. He had wanted so badly to fix things, to put things back the way they were. But I couldn't go back. Not to that version of myself. Not to the woman who had been willing to sacrifice everything for someone who couldn't see her worth. And now, as I sat in my apartment in Morocco, the sound of the city buzzing outside, I knew I had made the right choice. I had left. I had chosen myself. And in doing so, I had found a life that was mine. One that was free of guilt, free of regret, and free of anyone else's expectations. Daniel's life was unraveling, but it was no longer my problem to fix. I had spent too many years trying to fix him. I had spent too many years chasing after a love that wasn't real. Now I was finally free. The sun was setting over the Atlas Mountains, casting a warm, golden light over the landscape below. I sat on the balcony of my small apartment, a cup of tea in my hands, the cool evening breeze brushing against my skin. It had been months since I had left everything behind, my home, my son, the life I once knew. And now, as I looked out at the beauty of the Moroccan landscape, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't thought was possible. The journey I had taken wasn't just across countries. It was a journey within myself. I had traveled far from the woman I used to be, from the mother who had spent years giving everything for someone who didn't value her. And now, as I watched the sky turn from orange to pink to deep purple, I realized something. The journey was never just about escaping. It was about healing, about finding the strength to walk away, to let go of the bitterness and resentment that had weighed me down for so long. The past few months had been a slow, painful unraveling of the life I had known, but in the end, it had been worth it. The pain of losing Daniel, of being cast aside, no longer consumed me. It was still there, buried deep inside, but it didn't control me anymore. I had made peace with it. I had accepted that sometimes the only way to heal is to walk away. I no longer spent my days questioning what went wrong, wondering where I had failed or how I could have fixed things. I had learned that I couldn't fix him. I couldn't fix the broken pieces of a relationship that had never truly been whole. And I didn't need to. I had spent so many years focused on Daniel, on his needs, his happiness, his approval. But now, I realized that I had forgotten about myself in the process. I had forgotten what it meant to live for me, to want something for myself. But that had changed. I had rediscovered who I was without anyone else's expectations or judgments hanging over me. I was Nancy, not just a mother, not just someone's wife. I was a woman who had learned to live for herself, to embrace her own strength and independence. And though I would never forget what Daniel had done, I had let go of the need for him to understand it. He might never fully grasp the depth of what he had taken from me, but that was no longer my burden to carry. I had stopped waiting for his apology, for his recognition of my worth. I had stopped needing his approval to feel whole. I had found my own peace, and I was finally whole again. I looked down at my phone, where I had left a message from Daniel, one that I had never replied to. It had been weeks since I'd heard from him, but his words still lingered. "I'm sorry. I know I've made mistakes. I hope we can find a way back to each other." I read it again, but this time it didn't stir anything in me. No anger, no sadness, just a quiet sense of acceptance. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't even feel regret. I had accepted that things had ended the way they did, and that was okay. I had walked away from the life I thought I would always have. But in doing so, I had found a life I never could have imagined. A life where I was free, where I didn't have to be defined by anyone else's choices or expectations. The sky darkened and the stars began to twinkle above, as if to remind me that I was never alone. I had always had everything I needed within me. I just had to rediscover it. I took a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs as I exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. I had healed. I had let go of the past. And now, I was ready for whatever came next. Daniel's absence no longer left a hole in my heart. It was as if over time, that hole had been filled with something else. Something new. Something that had always been there, waiting for me to find it. My own strength. My own peace. My own sense of self. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled.